Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, a member of the Banking, Intelligence, and Armed Services Committees. The senator is one of 6 Republican lawmakers recently sanctioned by China. Senator, thanks for joining us. And you've been an outspoken critic of specifically, I think, the CCP more than just China. But given what we're watching right now, what do you think? And we have an expression called terminal pricing. What does the end game look like for where you'd like the United States to be in relation to China with all of these tech issues? What does it look like?
Hey, Joe, good morning. Yeah, I guess after sanctions last week from the Chinese Communist Party, I won't be able to take my wife on our long-planned second honeymoon to Wuhan anymore. But China sanctioned me really because I'm in the way of what they hope to do. They hope to dominate the world economy. They hope to replace the United States as the world's primary economic and military power. And they hope to do it, as you alluded to, in the world of tech. But the Trump administration, after many years in administrations before his, has finally stood up to China. Just yesterday, for instance, they clamped down on American-made technology going into semiconductor chips, ultimately bound for Huawei, which is an arm of Chinese intelligence, which has been underwritten by the Chinese government for years and years and years, which has given it a dominant position in building out the next generation of wireless technology, something we can't allow to happen, not only for economic reasons, but for security reasons as well. And we've finally taken long overdue steps to begin standing up to China's years and years of preying upon America's workers and factories, our companies, our inventors, stealing our jobs, stealing our intellectual property. What we want China to do is to finally start behaving like a normal civilized nation, not like a communist party that is going to continue to steal our prosperity and threaten our security.
I guess if it's done in a way that's illegal or through cheating or through stealing, it's one thing. And that's where we always hear the disagreements, because the United States wants to be the preeminent economy in the world. China wants to be the preeminent economy in the world. There's nothing wrong with that, and competition is healthy. But your point is that it's for years it's been done in unscrupulous, unethical ways through cheating and stealing. But that's where you get the argument. People want proof. That's
right. And China, going back to, look, and this is a problem of both parties as well. We passed most favored nation status on a permanent basis in the last year of the Clinton administration, gave China access to the World Trade Organization in the first year of the Bush administration. China's never upheld those commitments. It always breaches its international commitments, and it always uses subsidies and import controls and export finance and other means to undercut not just the United States, but other democratic economies all around the world. That's one reason why, for instance, Huawei nearly cornered the market before the Trump administration took action on 5G wireless technology. When you compete with China, you're not just competing with Chinese entrepreneurs and Chinese workers. You're competing against the Communist Party, which has one goal: to strengthen the power of the party in Chinese society relative to every other part of Chinese society, and to strengthen the Chinese nation. That's not something that we should put upon our businesses and our workers. They should not have to compete with a mercantilist communist power. And that's something that's high past time that we stood up to, and I'm glad the Trump administration is doing that.
So what's it look like, though? Delisting, no more IPOs. Our own Jim Cramer talks about how important chips are, and do we, with Taiwan Semi, do we become a protectorate for Taiwan Semi? How far do we take it? What's the end look like for you? Does that ever hurt the U.S.? Come back and hurt us in terms of trade and.
Yeah, we have to protect our economic independence. We have to protect our security. So, for instance, semiconductors, not really made in China because they don't have the American spirit of innovation and invention. They are made in places like Taiwan using American-made technology. That's what the Trump administration did this week, saying that chips using American technology can no longer go into Huawei. What I would like to do is see critical industries like semiconductors, like basic drugs, be made at least to some degree in the United States, so we have resiliency built into our system, so we don't see the kind of threat that we faced in March and April when China had the market cornered on certain critical goods. I think that is vitally important for the American people. A lot of them already understood it before this pandemic, but I think all of them understand it now.
What do you think? speaking of end games, what's going to happen with stimulus 4, wherever we were? Just shifting gears entirely. We want to get your thoughts on that. And S&P's challenging new highs.
Yeah.
Some people say, on the one hand, that doesn't give a lot of impetus to Congress, or and maybe it's not necessary at this point. But certain sectors are still hurting.
Well, Joe, Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats walked away a couple weeks ago from a reasonable compromise bill that would have helped given aid where it's most needed to those industries that are hardest hit, to help businesses stay afloat, to help families who are working in some of those industries like hotels or tourism and hospitality. They walked away from it. Now, apparently, they're going to come back to Washington because they've worked themselves into a fevered conspiracy theory that Donald Trump is stealing post office boxes in the middle of the night. Joe, this is crazy talk. This is the Democrats trying to preemptively blame the post office for Donald Trump beating Joe Biden in November, and to cover up the fact that they have not been able to sit down at the table and get a reasonable compromise bill worked out. The president took some executive actions that can help some in the short run, but we hope that we can get a better bill passed if the Democrats will simply abandon their $3 trillion liberal wish list and reach some kind of accommodation with the Republicans in Congress who want to help those people who need the most help.
The possibility of reclosures and schools that have tried to open. I know you saw it in North Carolina, Chapel Hill. It's tough, and it's policymakers really don't have any clear-cut path that's going to be absolutely right with no risk. Where are we right now in dealing with this pandemic? You're going to hear at this convention every single night. You're going to hear the Trump administration criticized for its response to the pandemic. Where are we at this point in your view?
Yeah, Joe, so just take the example you just gave of schools. There's no doubt that it's a challenge for some schools to reopen. I visited schools across Arkansas, all of which will be opening in person this month, but also offering a virtual option for parents who want to keep their children away from the classroom for health reasons. But it's going to be a challenge. That's one reason why one grounds of compromise in virus legislation would be money for schools to reopen. In many cases, getting the kinds of physical protective barriers they need, whether it's plexiglass screens or more desks or outdoor tents and canopies or what have you. The evidence clearly shows, though, that our kids, especially our young kids, need to be in school getting in-person instruction. More broadly, as we confront the virus, there's a lot of exciting developments in terms of low-cost at-home testing, more developments on vaccines as well. Again, our legislation would have provided more funding for that kind of testing and vaccine development as well. That's why it's so disappointing that the Democrats walked away from the negotiating table because they were demanding $3 trillion in oftentimes unrelated spending. And now their main priority is to come back to Washington to try to feed into this crazy conspiracy theory about the post office. What they need to do is focus on the virus and the impact of the virus, both economic and health, to help our country get back to something like normal.
Since you bring up the post office again, Senator, since you bring up the post office again, where do you stand on this? Do you think the post office is ready and able to handle all the mail-in ballots that are anticipated this year? And do you think that's the right way for people to be voting?
Of course, they're ready and able to handle it. Look, the post office has long had challenges. There's no doubt about that. And like any business that had major operation, it's been impacted by the virus. But if every person who voted in 2016 voted by mail, which isn't going to happen, and every vote took 3 pieces of mail, which isn't going to happen, that would still be fewer pieces of mail than the post office handles in a single day. It is a tiny, tiny fraction of the mail that the post office handles between Labor Day and Election Day. The Democrats have totally manufactured a conspiracy theory, apparently based on a few tweets from washed-up celebrities, about post office boxes being stolen because they are worried that Donald Trump is going to beat Joe Biden, and they want to cover up the fact that they refuse to pass reasonable compromise legislation to help people and businesses who have been harmed by this virus. But the post office is more than capable of handling an increase in mail-in ballots. They don't deserve the Democrats' attacks on their operations for this election.
Hey, Senator, just as an aside, someone asked me to ask this about the UAE deal with Israel brokered by the Trump administration. Does that open up new markets since you're on the Armed Services Committee, does that open up new markets for some defense sales to either the UAE or?
Yeah, it's an incredible success story. It certainly puts a lie to all those people like Joe Biden who claimed that when we moved our embassy to Jerusalem, Arab nations would turn their back on Israel and walk away for good. The UAE has been an outstanding partner of the United States. They've long invested in United States military articles. I suspect they'll do even more of that now. I also suspect that there could be other Arab nations that follow in this path, and that also could open up the opportunities for more arms sales to our allies to defend against enemies like Iran.
I guess just to return to what began our discussion, Senator, you think about Alibaba or maybe some of the companies that that maybe we don't want to preclude from doing business with in the United States. How do we make sure that we don't overshoot from the political heat that is surrounding and the tension surrounding China right now? How do we walk that fine line? Because they're a major trading partner, and if they're close to us in terms of economic strength, that is a trading partner that we want to have business with.
Well, they are a major trading partner, Joe, but also that trading partnership has given them a lot of leverage over policy formulation in the United States. Anytime you hear Washington talking about a tougher action against the Communist Party, you hear a lot of corporate America running to Washington saying, don't hurt our markets, don't hurt our operations, which in effect turns them into a part of the China lobby. Now, look, we should be open-minded about Chinese companies that have operations in the United States, but we also need to be clear-eyed about the threat that China poses. You mentioned TikTok earlier. That's a perfectly good example. To most people, TikTok looks like just a harmless, fun, short-form video, when in reality it's a Trojan horse on the phones, especially of our kids, vacuuming up all their personal data, sending it back to China, which the Communist Party is going to have access to for the rest of their lives. We have to be very clear-eyed and hard-nosed about the threat that these companies can pose to our privacy, to our prosperity, to our security.
All right, Senator, thank you for being with us this morning. We appreciate it,
Thank you,
you're a frequent guest, and we appreciate having you on. We'll see you again soon. Coming up, the big